The memorial room was never going to be good. The past looking upon the past, that was, well, double bad. Or did it cancel itself out? I was never really good at maths. As a colt, I used to say 1, 2, 3, lots. As I approached the doorway, I stopped briefly, despite the cantering and my recorder still playing. What number had lots been? 4. What came after it? Ah! Loads. If only cynically, it settled my nerves to concentrate on the idiotic dumbness I'd been plagued with on my youth without a proper education. Well, that implied I still wasn't an idiot. What pony my age couldn't read anyway? That precise lack of skill was being shown in my trust of the recording, for the room ahead of me held an elaborate sign above it. Unable to read the words, I was wandering into the unknown. Inside was a low ceiling. The vague shapes of furniture around it stood out to me, but I stuck to the wall nearest the door for now. I still had no idea what was in here. To my surprise, though, someone had glued wooden decor to the steel walls, giving this room a very low-budget version of an antiqued look.
All right, every pony, settle here for a minute. I'm going to try and see if I can tap into the cameras. Make sure every pony else is settled before we go. If we're being forced to go into the living areas to reach the science level's doorways, I do not want any pony caught in a worst-case scenario crossfire. Bean, can you get that terminal going?
Sure thing, Sculpt.
Right. Once you're logged in, use my clearance to synchronize all the pitbucks of the residents, not the scientists. We don't want to warn them.
Why?
If we're all synced up, it means that we can all have access to each other to send warnings or an all clear. But more crucially, it means that any pony can be tracked at any time on the same pitbuck transmit signal.
Again, why?
Proof, Bean. I don't want any rumors floating. The residents can watch our positions on their eyes forward sparkles and know that we didn't do any killing or anything. They'll have our records on their pitbucks.
Fine. It'll be faster if I just make every pitbuck that enters the signal range do it.
Whatever it takes, Bean. Thank you.
Casting my pitbuck light around, I could see the terminal he had used. A brief inspection, banging my hoof on the casing, revealed it to be long dead. I pilfered the drawers below it, finding little but a few old books and massive folders of papers. A multi-tool sat at the back end. I'd seen one before for working with nuts, bolts, and washers. Grabbing it in my mouth, I added it to my saddlebag before, without really thinking, adding the 2 books as well. We were still trying to loot things after all, and it was Protégé we had to please. Taking the time to hunt around, my pitbuck cast illumination over a few classroom tables. I wondered if foals came here to learn about the world they had left. Perhaps a stable version of a field trip? Through the forest, into the past? The thought was oddly alike with how this 2-year job with Philadelphia worked. Out of the slave pits and across the waste before being thrown into a stable. Yet somehow, I didn't feel like I had left Philadelphia at all. The slavers were still there, always watching the only way out, to get us back in the wagons. The ponies on my recording continued to mutter about who was where and how safe they were. Yet, as I trotted into this memorial, my light shone off various glass objects, casting a glow over the wall to my right. With this, I witnessed something entirely new. Art. For the first time in my life, I witnessed art. Arrayed along the walls, framed paintings, pictures, photos, sketches. With my mouth agape, every sense seemed to deaden as I trotted down the wall. Contrasted against the horrid gray and darkness, I now saw color, shape, and form. Ponies drawn beautifully with a myriad of expressions, clustered in groups of lavishly detailed singular portraits. This was one place of beauty within the void, and I realized that these had been drawn by ponies before the balefire. One held green fields that glittered in the sun, and Pegasi roamed freely beside earth ponies and unicorns. It had a small town made of thatchwork roofs and white constructs sprung up in a valley between hills. A huge circular town hall marked the center. Without even having to think, I knew that if I had been alive then, I would have wanted to live there, in that place of meadows, rivers, and beautiful multicolored tents that made up... what was it? A market? I doubted I'd be very good at haggling. Ponies only ever told me what I was to give them, not the other way around. There were other huge vistas of cities. One was obviously Manhattan, another Philadelphia, and the last, shifting to nature, displayed a dark forest. Trotting from each to each, it made the artist in me envious. Dragging my sketchbook from my saddlebag, I flicked through images that paled in comparison to these masterworks. I'd never encountered any pony else's proper drawings before. Maddeningly trying to work out how they'd gotten the light to look like that, or how they'd gotten such consistent shapes, my eyes flicked from painting to drawing to even photo. Even beside my fear of the stable, while clutching my little scrawled journal close, I felt a little fear that I'd never be as good as all this. Everything I drew came from the heart, but it just felt like what I imagined in my mind was never what really came out. Did they feel the same way at a higher level? Was I the only pony artist who felt that way? I wanted to meet them, ask them 1,000 questions on how their art was so beautiful, so well formed, so free. But despite my envy, I could not hide a small smile creeping across my face as I witnessed the work they had left behind for ponies like me to find. One had the goddesses, Celestia and Luna, arcing around one another in the twilight sky. The next, multiple Pegasi wearing identical blue and yellow costumes soaring in perfect formation around cloud buildings. Even through my fleece, I felt a little twitch on either side of my torso at the wondrous sensation of limitless freedom before me, so much so that I almost tripped over a display case. Its glass was long dusty, but utterly preserved. About 6 of them filled the middle of the room. Regaining my posture, I wiped the dust away with a hoof, staring inside. Lots of little cards filled with tiny writing taunted me, but there were racks of medallions and colorful ribbons, like amulets. They were perfectly preserved, glinting in my pitbuck's light as I saw gold-encrusted battle ponies embedded on them. One particularly fancy one had the sun and moon symbol, while a great many bore the symbol of a giant apple, carved from jade crystal and bound with red ribbon. Standing up with my front hooves pressed against the glass, I could not deny a part of me wanted them. They were so pretty. That blue one would go really nice for Glimmer to thank her. Oh, and that one with the ruby. I was sure the mare would enjoy it. I could get little ones for all of the ponies who had helped me. These things were jewelry, right? Unfortunately, the glass was too thick for my weedy front hooves to lift or move. Banging my BB gun against it, I realized I would break my teeth long before it shattered. A small lock was at the side, but I had nothing to deal with it. Returning to the desk, I hunted around the back of its cupboard door, but found nothing much. Just some old stained mane gel, a bunch of bobby pins to hold up one's mane, and a screwdriver for no apparent reason. Wait. Grinning, things finally clicked in my head, like a lock coming open. Bending forward, I picked up the screwdriver. I knew what to do to get it open. Let's see hat lock. Approximately 45 seconds of effort later, I realized that banging the screwdriver's handle off the lock was not going to work, nor was trying to lever the strength through the arched metal of the padlock. These things were useless! Yet even as I fumbled, there came yet another thunk from behind me in the orchard. My voice's pitch broke, and I dove behind the memorial case with a yelp. Whipping my head around to the doorway, I saw a blackened shape standing in it, the tree behind it shaking. Whimpering, I tried to just simply hide with my back to the case, hooves pressed to either side of me to be as flat against the case as I could. It made no sound, no smell, no presence. Yet somehow I knew it was coming into the room. My hooves skittered on my pitbuck, trying to turn off the light, but instead it began to project furious static, blocking the recording. The closer it came, the louder the static got. It was louder than it had ever been, shrieking and rasping no matter how hard I buried the speaker to my belly to deaden it. I heard the lock of the case I was hiding behind click, as though some pony were testing it to make sure it were closed. My pitbuck light finally died, plunging me into pitch black where I couldn't even see my own body beneath me. A background ambience, like an unsettling feeling in the air, got thicker, as though the atmosphere itself was moving and condensing as the static got louder. It had to be coming around the case! Willing my terrified and frozen limbs to function, I scooted away down the other side of the long case, past the back door of the room, and rolled into the next line of displays. I just managed to stifle my whimper as my wings ached at the ground contact from the roll. The electronic drone from my pitbuck dropped a little as I put distance between me and that. Only now did I feel the wetness from my eyes dripping all over my face. Wiping my eyes with a hoof, I curled up under the case as best I could. It must have only been a minute, but it felt like hours as the warped sound grew and faded intermittently, along with the occasional sound of something in the room moving or being adjusted. I risked a look out. There it was, by the desk, pony-shaped but indistinct, more like a gap in the darkness in the shape of one. I couldn't focus on the outline this time. It was as though my vision slid right off it. Without so much as another sound, it simply seemed to fade. A moment later, I heard the trees being struck again. Then nothing. It took me a good 5 minutes to build the courage to even step outside from under the case again. Limping back across, feeling every ache I'd been carrying, I rubbed my tender back and looked around before one thing caught my eye. Or rather, an absence did. Every single one of the medallions was gone. Very easily, it struck me. It had heard me attempting to steal them, so it had taken them, to protect them from the would-be thief. I had offended the past. Now it was trying to stop me doing more. My mind raced. Was it coming back? When it got its valuables to safety, would it return to deal with me? A whole new respect for care of the past in here overtook me. I couldn't take anything. Back in the canteen I had stolen from the food locker. I'd found it looking around there. In the forest room, I'd disturbed the apples it must have believed were still in the basket, so it had begun bucking trees and searching for me. Now it was protecting the jewelry. Never in my life, not even in the moment of realization that I had failed in my run for the wall, not even under the master, not even when I had been locked in the rad chamber by the magister, not ever had my heart felt so cold and tight with anxiety and fear. I wanted out. Unwilling to spend my time near the door, I moved deeper into the memorial room. The far wall would do for now. Yes, nice and safe away from where that monster had gone. Artwork softened my terror as I passed a portrait of 6 mares, the same 6 I'd seen everywhere. Wait, if they were here, that meant... Yep, she was too. Grinning like a mad pony off the portrait at me. If I ever learned to color pictures, one thing I knew was there would never be any pink in them. Sorry, Glimmer. Some things are just that important. I watched her eyes carefully as I made my way past from the right, confirming that they didn't move. Perhaps I could finally begin to believe she wasn't out to get me. Pinky had her front 2 hooves on the front of the painting, as though she was standing up on something. In fact, she was in front of the painting. Staggering backwards into the case, my eyes locked on her as Pinky emerged from out of the painting like a lifelike pony. Only after I saw she wasn't moving did I see some joker had continued the painting of her front hooves over the frame. Well, I didn't find it funny. Turning away from her, mostly, I checked a couple of times more just to be sure. I continued to move toward the far end, slowly being revealed by my pitbuck. I found the magnum opus of the room. The memorial wall. I didn't need to be a historian to know it. Long dead wreaths lay across the floor before a marble shrine. Candles sat unused on tall bronze sticks, while upon the shrine itself was everything that mattered. Old toys, pieces of jewelry, crude full drawings, and even small clocks. But more than anything, photographs. Layers and layers of them all across the wall. Each held a scrawled message on the wall or over the photo itself. I felt so small before this monumental image of what the stable residents had lost. Beautiful mares laughing with their bucks, little baby's first photo images, military snapshots, personal photos, pictures that were simply awful but obviously used because they were all that was left. Even pets. I saw a dog, rabbit, and even a red-colored balefire phoenix. Had they normally been read before the war? For some, there were only written notes, many with a little cutie mark sketched on them. A photo frame, 3 little sparks of magic, clouds, a chocolate bar. Ponies back then had such nice cutie marks. I felt my hindquarters bump onto the floor. The shrine rose easily 4 times my height, maybe more, right on top of the room and covering the entire wall. Individual candles had once been lit here in little holders all across the marble steps leading up to the wall itself. Every square inch was covered in something between the embedded marble pillars upon the smooth rock wall. Every pony upon this wall had died in the balefire. Little tears began dripping. I tried wiping them, but it was no use. They kept coming. I didn't feel horror, no. Instead, there was just a slow, haunting, and lingering sense of tragedy at seeing the personal impact of the event I had to live in the aftermath of. 200 years later, and we were still feeling the shockwaves. It only felt right. Digging into a pocket, I placed the little bell from the scooter on one of the marble steps beside a pretty-looking red candle, similar to the scooter. I hoped the foal would appreciate it. That, and the thing that was haunting this place on its own agenda. Part of me hoped that this one little act might relieve some of the guilt of having tried to steal their most valued possessions. Hearing the recorder remain silent but for the ambience of their break and meaningless chatter, I just sat there for a while, staring at each picture in turn, trying to guess their names, trying to not think that every single one of them had died in the balefire that consumed their world, while these lucky few were trapped down here safely. "I'm so sorry,"